What's going on, guys? Car coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be bringing you something yet again a little bit different from doing the normal deck gameplay where we just pick a deck, build it, and play through some games, give you an idea of how the deck plays and whatnot. Today we're going to be diving into what, after the dust has settled on the set of Ikoria, kind of some of the cards that you kind of just see now as like standard cards in the set of standard decks that have come up based around these cards. I'm not saying these cards in any particular ranking are better or worse than other cards, but these cards just seem the cards that everyone seems to adopt into their decks. I've also added a little bit of my flavor into this just because I know there's some certain cards here I think they're just underestimated overall in the standard set, and I think that they're actually more powerful than maybe they get represented in the thing. But it's not like they're terrible cards, they're really actually good cards. It's just I don't think anyone's has unlocked the secrets of really getting the benefit of these cards in their decks in the standard meta. Enough being said about that, let's get into the cards, break it down, kind of go over about how I think some of these cards have shaped new deck metas as well as improved maybe other metas that were already existing before Ikoria came out. So first and foremost, just to say, this card, let alone the ability of cycling in the standard meta, has kind of shaped in the new budget meta that has been going around. Flourishing Fox itself, for a one cost cycler card, and every time you cycle a card it gets +1/+1, has kind of shaped the way the meta has worked. This budget cycling deck has kind of shown up in the standard meta. It's a very affordable deck, especially if you're a newer player to Magic the Gathering Arena, and overall cycling for one cost and so many cards actually across various colors that all cost 1 mana has really shaped the way this deck actually performs. I mean, it actually performs in the best of one very, very strongly. I mean, you get your opponent down to at least somewhere in that 10 health range, cast Zenith to their face if you've dumped a lot of cyclers into the graveyard, and you win the game. Like I said, besides the Flourishing Fox, I mean, I could have included all the cycler cards that kind of go along with it, but I would say this one tops the cakes as making that deck just as good. All right, next card up, we have the Fiend Artisan. This is my little personal favorite. My first video for Ikoria was a Golgari aggro deck that pretty much focused on Fiend Assassin. His ability to get +1/+1 from each creature card in our graveyard, I feel like works very well for that graveyard dump. I mean, there's various cards that just get cards into your graveyard, and every time there's a creature card in your graveyard, he gets just that one more mana. And I actually think his secondary ability is just as good. I mean, especially in the mid game where maybe you're looking for that one particular card to either get the combo off or just get something pretty strong that has a decent come into battlefield kind of effect. I think his ability is really good. And when you sacrifice another creature, you pretty much can, you know, give him another +1/+1. I mean, it's at sorcery speed, but I think overall that ability is actually very strong. I mean, the one downfall to him is that he can be targeted by some of our take control of this creature kind of things, especially that one cost red mana one, which is kind of frustrating, but I think he can get very good late game, especially against other Garuda decks. He can definitely get big pretty quickly. I mean, I did make a Garuda deck, I think, as well, where I did put him in, and you know, for a Garuda hit, I mean, getting him after you've done 3 or 4 Garuda cycles, he could be already like a 8/8, 9/9, 10/10, even higher. I don't really know. But overall, I would say he's a pretty solid card. I think his value is still up there. I think he has other roles outside of standard that make him very sought after. So in the physical paper form of Magic, he's going to be one of those cards that are going to definitely fetch a high price. Next card up is Winota. This is one of those controversial cards where, in the sense that pretty much every time you attack with a non-human creature, you get a trigger of this ability where you look at the top 6 cards of your library, you may put a human creature from that top 6 onto the battlefield and give it indestructible until end of turn, and it's also in the attacking position. So what had come out of this is that there's just Jeskai builds out with this Winota card that pretty much will get you Agent of Treacheries onto the battlefield pretty much without paying their mana cost. So you go into attack, you get an Agent of Treachery proc, which then gives you an Agent of Treachery on your side of the battlefield, and now your opponent has maybe one less blocker because now you're stealing something from them. You can also get just a very massive wide board on your opponent very quickly, and your opponent pretty much by turn forward, just kind of like look at you and be like, well, I guess I gotta take it. But overall, it's a very strong card. I think it may not be in the best, like the deck itself may not be the top tier meta deck out there, but it's a fun like best of one card to run in a deck that your goal is just to get the Winota triggers and get all the things and attack your opponent's face and pretty much take their things with Agent of Treachery procs from this Winota combo. So the next card up, I think, has made a lot more recent presence onto the meta, and it is Mythos of Aluna. The idea here is that it pretty much copies target permanent, and if green and red was spent to cast a spell, copy that permanent, except this token whenever this permanent enters battlefield, it fights target one creature you don't control. I mean, that effect is okay, but the fact that we just got another card that copies things, which makes it just as good, and it's any permanent, it doesn't have to be your permanent, so that also makes it solid. So I mean, if your opponent has a nice, I don't know, your opponent has a nice planeswalker on the battlefield that you want, you can make a copy of it. If your opponent has just a nice creature that you want, make a copy of it. If you want to cast a second planeswalker you have, make a copy of it. You can kind of get how this card becomes overpowered. I don't know in the sense that if it's as good as, you know, Spark Double, in the sense that I don't know if the Legend rule still plays in effect here. I don't think Spark Double says something about the Legend rule not playing in effect. But the idea of just making copies of things that your opponent has or you have, just to get more triggers, just makes this card pretty strong. And I've seen in certain metas that are meta builds for this card that have been starting to add this card into their particular decks, overall making this card, I think, fairly played. I mean, I don't think you're playing 4 of these, but you're playing maybe 1 or 2 at the most, which is going to be one of those things that may get annoying because your opponent's going to cast something and then just copy it for 4. So the next thing up here is going to be the Sterix. I'm not saying this card in particular is the best of the best. I mean, it's a 6 cost mutate card. There's ways to make it slightly cheaper. I mean, there's also a lot of ramp in green to kind of get to 6 mana quickly. But the benefit of this is mutate overall, I think at first was very like it felt very meh. But I think the decks are starting to come out that are going to be revolving around mutate that kind of get the best synergies. I mean, this card, if you really think about it, is actually fairly strong in the sense that every time this card mutates on a creature that's already been mutated, you get to reveal the top cards of our library until we revealed X permanent cards where X is the number of times this creature has mutated, and then we get to put those cards onto the battlefield. So maybe in the process of getting to 6 mana, if you mutate on this creature maybe 1-2 times, so you're at least getting 1 to 2 triggers prior to this. I mean, overall, it's a very solid card. I mean, it's a 6/6 body for 5 regardless. I mean, I know it doesn't have trample, but you put this on something that maybe has a few token counters on it, you can get a very big thing, give it a little bit of trampling, and I mean, this thing gets a problem pretty quickly. And the idea that you get X permanents onto the battlefield when you mutate it is just one of those things that can definitely swing the game, get you a little bit wider, get into your opponent, and pretty much maybe seal the game by the time you play this. Now, the next part is going to get a little bit controversial. I mean, I'm not sure how everyone feels about companions. Some people were yet again, we're unsure on how these companions are really going to shape, especially Yorion, because it was like his ability was play your deck of no more than, 80 cards, at least 80 cards to be able to play him as a companion. But I mean, there's decks that have popped up that, just throw in more copies of more powerful cards, at least playing 4 sets of everything, and maybe throw in a couple extra cards to get to that 80, and maybe playing, 35 lands, which is pretty ridiculous if you think about it. But the idea that Yorion is a 5-cost 4/5 flyer with the ability to pretty much flicker things on your side of the battlefield in and out of the field, and then get the effects a second time. There's decks that have been utilizing this card to get additional effects, especially playing all of your omens and stuff like that to get the triggers a second time. I mean, could you imagine Omen of the Seas, Omen of Life, all of them, and pretty much triggering them a second time, scrying 2, drawing a card, gaining 2 life, putting 2 1/1s on the battlefield, doing 2 damage to your opponent, its creatures. All those things are very good. On top of it, there is a deck that's kind of come out with Yorion and Luca, where pretty much it's use Luca to get counters, which we'll kind of get into. But Yorion is one of those cards that kind of is the flagship staple card that you need for the deck to make it work. Then you got Garuga. enough could be said about this. I mean, it's just one of those cards that's a little bit icing on the cake for the Fires of Intervention decks that are already out there in the meta. Pretty much it's a companion it's really all we're using it for in the Fires of Intervention deck is the companion cost. We're just going to limit our cards to anything 3 or greater, which is already not hard for Fires decks. And what this does is when it comes into the battlefield, you draw a card for each other permanent we control with a converted mana cost of 3 or greater. So if you have Fires on the battlefield, maybe you have whatever you played on turn 4, and then maybe you played something before you played him, you at least draw maybe 2-3 cards, if not more, depending on when you feel like drawing him, playing him into the field, which then fills up your hand to then give you more things to throw into Fires to then get on the battlefield for cheap. I mean, it was one of those things that they just kind of like gave to Fires. It's like they didn't need anything already. The deck was already strong, but this is one of those things that just makes Fires just a little bit better. Then the next card up is we have Luca the Copper Coat Outcast. This is the card right now that I think has been one of those cards that have popped up in the Ikoria deck I was talking about before, where pretty much we're utilizing that -2. We get a token on the battlefield. We run a Jeskai deck. All it runs is token creatures and Agent of Treacheries, and pretty much what we're doing is we're -2 in one of our tokens to dig to an Agent of Treachery onto the battlefield, take one of our things, because you know we need another way to get Agent of Treachery onto the battlefield for cheaper, and pretty much allows us to Agent of Treachery on turn 5. I think the deck has also thrown in Fire's Intervention, which is just another way to get him onto the battlefield as well for not paying any mana for him. And I mean, his first ability is not terrible in the fact that we can, you know, exile top 3 cards of our library and we may cast that card as from exile as long as we chose Luca, which is not bad. And the -7, I don't think I've seen anybody really play the -7, but the -2 is the ability that makes Luca so good in the fact that pretty much you just get a creature onto the battlefield with a higher converted mana cost. And like I said, playing a deck with no creatures other than agents and sacrificing tokens to this ability just makes it just that little bit of, hey, we just needed something else to really get Agent of Treachery onto the battlefield for quicker. Oh, and the next one up we have is Garuda. I mean, nothing can be said about this card. It is kind of a little pricey card to have its proc effect, but when you do get his ability onto the battlefield, it's one of those things that can definitely pretty much change the game. I mean, his ability in general is flipping the top 4 cards of each library, and you get to put a creature card with even converted mana cost onto the battlefield under your control. I mean, you combine that with Spark Doubles, you combine that with Thassa's, you're proccing this thing a few times, maybe in one turn, if not multiple times by the time your turns end, if not later in the game. Set him as your companion because all you need is even converted mana cost stuff, creature-wise, and you can build a deck completely around this and ramp up to him by turn 6, if not sooner. Overall, his ability is just what makes him so good. Other than that, I mean, he's just a 6/6 for 6. But that enters when it comes into the battlefield effect is the icing on the cake to make that just good combo deck to get the one particular card to maybe get enough damage on the battlefield to swing into your opponent and just end the game. We're not going to really talk about the actual card itself in the fact that the 6 cost enchantment. We're actually going to talk about it for its cycling ability. Its cycling ability is actually what I think people are playing this card for. I don't think, unless you're really specifically playing like some sort of jankier deck that is going for non-creature spells and getting XX Blue Shark creatures onto the battlefield, maybe you're playing something like Control-wise. The ability to have 2 costs, which you can play for just 2 and draw a card, is perfectly fine. But if you tap X maybe at the end of turn, especially like if your opponent has a Teferi out, you can tap, you know, X for like 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, and get a XX Shark token with flying onto the battlefield to then maybe attack into your opponent's Planeswalker, and they can't do anything about it in the sense that cycling can't be countered. Makes this card just that very, very good for any deck that, you know, throws blue in and plays some sort of splash for this. I mean, I think any deck that plays blue, especially in the higher meta tiers of the Magic, play this card for that ability. You know, worst case scenario, you get on the battlefield and then you start casting non-creature spells, especially in a control deck. You start getting some big sharks, and your opponent can't do anything about it because sharks are starting invading. You play. It's just a fun card, and I think the ability of cycling for a creature on top of just drawing a card just makes this card just that good. So there's not really one particular ultimate that really stands out. I mean, each have their own benefits. I mean, they're all pretty pricey. There's not any way to make them any cheaper to play. If you do run a Fires deck, you can pretty much just get 7 mana on the battlefield. You don't have to get the perfect mana to actually play these ultimatums, or maybe run one of these like more jankier like decks that have like some sort of combo to get spells that cost, you know, cost X amount onto the battlefield for free by cycling them or something like that to play an ultimatum. But overall, these ultimatums are pretty good, and like I said, a Jeskai deck that was pretty prominent before Ikoria came out kind of threw these ultimatums in as kind of a late game, kind of like, you know, gain 5 life, deal 5 damage, why not draw 5 cards and just kind of restart our whole hand so we can play more cards if we kind of get low on cards in our hand. So I chose Inspire Ultimatum, not because of anything in particular, but just because I think ultimatum cards are okay in certain situations. I don't think anyone's playing 4 ofs, but I mean the 1 to 2 in a deck has turned out to be pretty good. Now, to round this all out, yet again, it's one of those things that I don't think any of these stand out in particular, just based on mana type. But the addition of adding triome lands that count as islands, plains, mountains, swamps, forests, all the above in various different color combinations depending on what kind of tricolor deck you are playing, with the ability to also give them cycling, have turned out to be very good. I mean, if you draw them late game and you don't really need the mana, you can throw them into the bin and draw a card. The idea that maybe on turn 1 you play this into play tapped, and then all of a sudden you can pretty much produce any 3 colors of mana that maybe your deck is looking for, as well as even splashing in 1 to 2 of these into a deck that maybe just needs that additional black, white, blue, red, green mana just to kind of play a particular spell, makes these cards just very strong. And the idea that they're counted as a swamp, forest, or island, you know, utilizes them for things that make these cards searchable from your graveyard onto the battlefield. Enough can't be said. I think these are gonna be one of those cards that even when this cycle's out, it's gonna be one of those cards that maybe some historic, modern, I don't even know, vintage, I think they're too slow for vintage, but it's gonna be because they count as, they have the lands, like, you know, the basic land type in their name. I think I said that wrong. Because they have the land type in their name, I think it makes these cards very strong. And like I said, the idea to have a land to have a cycle ability, I think makes them that much better than just a basic dual land in that essence, especially in the late game, especially when you don't want to draw lands. But like I said, guys, I know these are some of the cards I think that are the most played currently from the set of Ikoria. If I missed any, let me know in the comments below. Maybe there's a particular card that you are a big fan of that came out of Ikoria that you're definitely using in one of your decks you currently are playing. If there's anything that you disagree on, let me know in the comments below. If you guys like this video, you know, let me know by hitting that like button. If you guys want to know I post more videos like this, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next video.